Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Bonnie Waslick, and I'm joined here with Dr. Sandra Vanderbilt from the George Washington University for yet another set of curricular bites. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get into it. So I just want to start out with the sort of open question of how do you define curriculum studies?
Well, thank you. I'm excited to hear others' responses too. And I would define curriculum studies as an established and emerging field where we sort of look back to tradition, but we're also bringing new things in and looking forward. Curriculum studies is interdisciplinary, but it's also focused. And so I want to talk a little bit about how I experience it and how I've seen it come to be where we are now. So when someone asks what is curriculum studies or what is curriculum theory, I often talk about how I think about curriculum and coming right out of those traditions that I mentioned, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. That curriculum is whatever shapes a person's ideas, what they think, what they believe, and how they came to know those things. And so curriculum is historical and political, it's racial and gendered, it's autobiographical and aesthetic. It's all of these things that come together. Many people bring in sort of phenomenological understandings, and it's also institutional. And so, with all of those things, we can think about curriculum as what is planned. And I think that often when people hear that I do work in curriculum, they might assume that it's the thing that's planned, but curriculum is also lived. So I want to talk a little bit about that. In that sort of interdisciplinary nature of curriculum studies, how I think of it is rooted in something that we call the reconceptualist tradition. So I'm going to take us back to the 1970s, and there was a rejection of reducing curriculum down to the materials that we think about maybe in K-12 schools, like a set of objectives and the lesson plans and what we do and the materials we use, and then we evaluate whether or not students got it or learned. And so there was a rejection of that, and an opening up to emphasizing the political and the subjective, again, the way that we come to know something through our lives and through the things that we encounter. And so oftentimes you might hear curriculum folks say things like curriculum as a complicated conversation, that the reconceptualist movement or the reconceptualist moment, people have debates over these things, was really opening up a complicated conversation about what is curriculum and what does it mean to study it. And so it's not separate from what we experience. The reconceptualists were looking at not only what is taught or how things are taught, but the experience of the person who is encountering whatever that might be that's teaching them. So that happens in schools, but it also happens in the rest of our lives too. So I think that curriculum studies is asking questions about all of that. And that's why I say there's an established field, but it's also emerging because those complicated conversations continue. That leaves us, I said I'm going to bring us back to the 1970s, but what about the last 40 plus years? And some folks talk about a post-reconceptualist, and some say that we're still in a reconceptualist moment. I think those conversations are really interesting, and I think that either perspective can be pretty convincing. But I think that this idea of what we know and how we know it, and then other critical questions like what knowledge counts and who does that benefit, all come in, and that's what we've seen emerge through this tradition, but over the last 40 years. So, curriculum studies, as for me, rooted in that reconceptualist tradition, is continuing to emerge. Whether, since the early 80s, we've been in a post reconceptualist moment, or we're continuing the reconceptualization of curriculum all the way to now. But yeah, I think that curriculum studies is an attempt to understand how people come to know something, come to know, what they believe, in all of the varied ways that we learn through life.
That's great. Thank you. And so, you're coming to us from Washington, D.C.,
Yep.
a historic institution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, can you say a little bit about how you feel that the field of curriculum studies or the engagement in curriculum theorizing matters today in our current socio-political context, which I'm sure in DC you feel in various ways,
Yeah.
the nation's capital.
Mm-hmm.
If you could talk just a little bit about what that means in this current educational landscape and
Mm-hmm.
why the field may or may not be as significant to the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that right now, curriculum studies is important and significant given what we are seeing both through austerity measures that are impacting higher education, but also K-12 education, that we need to be understanding what is being taught and learned and what we are taking up when priorities are given, like collapsing expertise in higher education because we need to save money. And so we're going to have people teaching outside of their expertise and things like that. We need to understand what's being taught to us through that. In the same time, in a context like Washington, D.C., in this current moment, we've been under occupation for over a year now, with the National Guard and other law enforcement heavily patrolling our streets. So that is teaching us something. It teaches my children something. It teaches me something. And I take it up in particular ways where my learning has to do with understanding structurally what's going on in a new way because it's in my front yard. And so we need to be able to have the tools that curriculum studies offers to understand the context. So in curriculum studies, there is an emphasis, and has been in these traditions that I'm talking about, there's an emphasis on understanding curriculum as political, understanding the historical context. And we need that to be able to understand this social moment, I believe. And so right now, I think that the field of curriculum studies is really responding to the current moment. And I think that critiques that maybe the field is too theoretical or not rooted enough in classroom-based practice or something like that. I think that our field is really responding directly to the current political, historical, social moment. And I see it. I see curriculum journals that are doing special issues, publishing articles that are directly responding. We have colleagues who are publishing books that help me understand what's going on right now. And so I think that there's a lot that we can look to in a moment that can be both shocking but also expected if you understand history and if you're able to put a curricular lens on thinking about American history as one example, that this isn't an unexpected moment. The ways that we may see things in our daily experiences may be shocking. I think that our colleagues who are writing and publishing right now are offering us ways to think about this and ways to be able to engage with others in the current moment. And I would say in my outside of outside of this institution time as a community member and in some organizing work that I do, that our field is talking directly to the issues that we're taking up here in the district and in other cities and places across our country.
That's great. Thank you. It's something about the field that I've always really appreciated is the consistent sociopolitical engagement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about folks who are founders of a field and their consistent engagement at that time
Yeah.
and the current generation that has picked it up in lots of different ways too. And even folks who are not necessarily in the field, maybe they themselves identify consistently with the field, are still very much of that tradition. And I think
Yeah.
that that's something that we bring that I don't think all academic fields have as a norm, right?
Yeah,
As a
and
common norm.
I agree, and I would say what we see from the way that folks who really founded the field and were a part of that 1970s reconceptualization was their acts of intellectual and also other forms of resistance that as they faced wars, as they faced curriculum reforms and then the pulling back of reforms in K-12 schools in the United States as they faced the violence of assassinations and other forms of violence in the 60s and 70s, that there was a response to that. And so I agree that the field of curriculum studies has in this tradition been extremely responsive. I had the opportunity to highlight some of that recently at a conference to say, if we as a field are seeing and concerned about these things, is our field actually relevant in responding? And it was extremely enlightening for me to take a step back and really look at all of the things that are happening and the responses that are coming from our field. I think that we have an example of tradition for that. Another thing that's really interesting, I was rereading some texts, preparing for some proposals and things like that that are coming, and sometimes language becomes commonplace, like language of social justice in this moment has both been co-opted, but then also in some moments diluted because of the commonplace nature. But really it was pointed to by other disciplines as well, but in curriculum, curriculum studies and curriculum theory, the taking up of justice orientations towards the way that we understand knowledge and towards the ways that we understand what it means to learn and do in the world, to live, has been rooted in this tradition and has been really brought out by folks along the way over, when I said that 40 plus years or whatever that is, we see that taken up. And so I think that it's encouraging for me to look back at texts that we might think of as founding texts in the field and to look at the history of it, but then to also look at how new conversations have emerged within the field out of those traditions and also drawing on other disciplines to be able to say new things that help us understand justice, help us understand liberation as we continue and as we new people come into the field and as we live in this moment. It's been really helpful to be able to look back too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm going to go just a little off script. You mentioned a conference. I'm assuming that I know what conference that is, and assuming that I'm on the right track anyway. Can you talk a little bit about which conference you're at and your role in that organization?
Yeah, so it was at AAACS, the American Association for the Advancement of Curriculum Studies annual conference a couple months ago. I am the current president of AAACS, and so I had the opportunity during my welcome session, it was an all-conference session, to highlight our call for proposals, which was a group effort, but really composed by Christopher Cruz, who is the current vice president of AAACS. And we were looking at extraction and enclosure and it was very much tied to the current political and social context of the continental United States of America. So we were looking at this and like, do we have tools available to us through curriculum studies that can respond? And so as I was thinking about what I wanted to do in the welcome session as the president of the association, and this is my first full year as president of AAACS, I really wanted to survey very recent work and say, what is going on in the field? And does it respond to this call for proposals that we composed as a program leadership? And there's a lot. There's a lot for us to highlight.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, could you touch on what are your scholarly contributions to this field?
Yes, I felt a little nervous about this question, and I think it's because of the ways that this field has nurtured me. And so, as I believe I was a second year doctoral student when I went to my first curriculum conferences, AAACS and the Journal of Curriculum Theorizing's Bergamo, their annual conference. And so this field has nurtured me to be a scholar. And so thinking about my contributions back to a field that I care deeply about, I felt a little nervous about, but I want to share how I see my work as contributing to the field of curriculum studies in a few ways. So before I transitioned into higher ed full-time 8 or 9 years ago, I was a K-12 school teacher, mostly as a reading specialist and special educator. So I come from a social or educational foundations background, very much in a disciplinary way through my master's degree studying critical literacy, and deeply influenced by Freire and Hooks, who have also deeply influenced our field in many ways. And so out of that, I then encountered curriculum studies more fully in my doctoral journey and work. So I would say that sort of educational foundations and curriculum studies was where my work really was and continues. Since my dissertation forward, those perspectives, I really value and feel that I've contributed to the narrative traditions within curriculum studies that value storytelling, that value listening attentively, so that we can then say something about this thing that we call curriculum, or what I was earlier describing as the things that shape our ideas, our beliefs, what we know, and how we come to know it. And so I think there's that. And within these narrative traditions, in curriculum studies, you see people that are engaged in phenomenological work of understanding people's lived experiences in many ways. And so in my own work, that's through listening and listening to story. And that means that I do work that's embedded with folks in community and that it's deeply contextual. And so the curriculum studies both gives me the tradition to work from, but then I'm also, I hope, contributing to those traditions as well as we see new things emerging. And so with curricular study and my professional work as a reading specialist and special educator and my own lived experiences, it led me to disability theorizing. And so when I was a graduate student, and I know that this was, it'll be 11 years ago because I was pregnant with my son. I sat on a panel at Bergamo and offered a paper that was the first time that I used disability theorizing to write. And I used that informed by curriculum studies. And I ended up on a panel with two strangers who are now dear friends and I've collaborated with, Jamie Buffington-Adams and Kelly Vaughan. And we all just kind of looked at each other and we're like, you're writing about disability too? We're like using some heavy theorizing in some similar ways, in some different ways. And I think that one of my contributions to the field has been alongside Jamie and Kelly and others along the way, but centering disability conversations, but also demonstrating why a disabled epistemology is helpful to curricular study. And so I see that as an important contribution that I have had the honor of being a part of in curriculum studies. And then a with that, out of that disability work, I think I've made a couple contributions to autobiographical inquiry in the field. The first is that in my own autobiographical work and some of the ways that I've written about um, about this important form of inquiry in our field, that I really emphasize in Currere what is called the progressive. And so in Currere, there's four movements or moments: the regressive, where you're thinking about your past experience; the progressive, that has to do with futuring, and I'll say more; the analytical, where you take those two and you are able to, through your work, observe yourself, observe your autobiography, observe your experiences so that you can start to make sense of it. And then the synthetical, which I'll also say a little bit more about, but that has to do with being able to come back to the present moment more aware, which really speaks to me as someone that does Freirean work, because, it raises one's consciousness, I think. But in the progressive moment, I really think that none of it is possible without that futuring. And so I've spent some time writing, and it's a thread that's emphasized in any of the autobiographical work that I've done that's available, that it's through futuring that I'm able to even understand my past experiences, that I need that to be able to observe it. And it's through that futuring that I can make sense of what I have to do in the world. That curriculum studies isn't just something that exists for the sake of existing. It's an active field. And autobiographical inquiry and the progressive have really helped me to understand what I can do and what I have to do next in order to realize futures that are more just, and that are better for people, better for the planet. And so that synthetical, I think, those scholars, Jamie Buffington-Adams and Kelly Vaughan, have helped me realize that I can't make sense of anything outside the relational. And so autobiographical inquiry is not solitary. Autobiographical work is not separate from the world or somehow individualistic. It's actually far from it. And so a contribution that I think I've made is thinking about the synthetical as relational. And that's really informed by a disabled epistemology too, that I can't make sense of things outside of relationships. And then last, within the field, I think that while my writing might not be as prolific as some others, I think the major contribution that I'll have made to the field ultimately will be service. And I want curriculum studies spaces to be welcoming. And so that is a priority when I think about what I'd like to contribute to the field.
Thank you. It reminds me a little bit of Denise Taillefer-Bazil, who at one point was talking about how movements function, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember her saying, like, it's whether you're out on the streets or you're behind the desk making it happen, all the roles are significant. And I think in the academy, we get so hyper-focused sometimes on the output of publications that we forget the necessity of what does it mean to make a space, and what is the placemaking of a field,
Mm-hmm.
and whose labor does that. And so as somebody who certainly benefits from the placemaking that you have contributed in so many ways, thank you for that work. It's important. And so, I would never even begin to say that it's somehow more than, less than. It's just, it is, and
Yeah.
in the being of what it is provides so much for our field. And so absolutely. And on that, to that point, I know that we talked about AAACS. You're
Mhm.
also working with Bergamo
Yes.
in service roles. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yes. So it's been really wonderful and exciting. So I served on the Graduate Student Council of Bergamo while I was a doctoral student. And did that for I think 4 years and got to know the conference. And it was my first experience ever being sort of on the other side of a conference. And then I helped out with AAACS a bit in graduate school as well. But for Bergamo, there's a couple of things. I am currently one of the foundation board members, and so supporting the organization and sort of the organizational logistics that happen behind the scenes to make sure that it's preserved into the future and healthy now and hopefully healthy in the future. And also just some of the decisions that need to happen in the background to support the journal and the conference. And then I right now am General Topics co-editor again with Christopher Cruz for the Journal of Curriculum Theorizing and Classroom Practice. And so in that role, I spend a lot of time reading what people are writing, working with peer reviewers, working with authors to improve their work and get it ready for publication. And so really involved in another new way, learning sort of the behind the scenes and being able to support the journal and support the foundation in my work there.
Thank you. And so, for our last question today, I was hoping that you could speak a little bit about one of your hopes. So, if you could sort of identify one thing that you hope for the field, what would it be?
So I can give you two. And
I'll take two.
thank you. And so I think even at the beginning, in talking about what is the field or how do I understand curriculum studies, and thinking about it as established and emerging or a tradition and something that new things are happening, for the future of the field, there has been a lot of important and like significant, and I mean significant in terms of importance and volume, work on archiving and preserving this tradition that I'm talking about. And so I hope for the field that we continue that archive and preservation. Especially, there are some things that I feel like since I was a graduate student, we'll be like, oh, that's in a box somewhere. Like getting these things preserved is a hope that I have for the future and something that I hope to contribute to as well and or continue to contribute to. And then my second hope would be that curriculum studies is a field marked by hospitality, that we are a field that welcomes graduate students, welcomes scholars from non-traditional pathways, that we are a field that exists within and beyond the borders of institutions, welcoming people into serious thinking so that we can be a part of the world more aware, but also that we are marked by hospitality. So those would be my hopes for the future.
Wonderful. Well, as always, in the description of this video and then on my website, I'll have some of Dr. Vanderbilt's work, remembering that Curricular Bytes is the smallest unit of measurement. So while we have a smaller video here and the extended video, whichever way you're joining us today, please remember that's just one way to engage with Dr. Vanderbilt and her work with the field more largely. And so I encourage you, as always, to do that. Get involved in any way that you choose. And we will see you next time. Thank you very much, Dr. Vanderbilt.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.